Hello everybody, welcome to today's webinar, Scale vs. Agility, Power BI Software Vendors Differentiating. I'm Justin Surgeon and I'll be hosting today's session. Today's webinar will share insights found in TBR's Business Intelligence Software Benchmark. If you'd like to learn more about this report, please reach out to myself or one of the analysts after the presentation. Before we begin, there are a few items I'd like to cover. I'll be recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube channel, TBRI channel. I encourage you to visit this channel to watch this presentation or any of the previous presentations we've posted. Second, I will be following up with all of you via email tomorrow afternoon with the link to today's recording as well as with the slides from today's presentation. Finally, we welcome questions on the material we're presenting today. Please send any questions you have to the Q&A function and we will address as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Now, I'd like to introduce our analyst presenting today. Geoff Woollacott is Principal Analyst in TBR's software practice and oversees the syndicated research team for the software and BI services practice. Meaghan McGrath is a TBR analyst and an author in TBR's Business Intelligence Software Vendor Benchmark, which is what we are presenting today. And with that, let me hand this over to the analysts.
Hi, thank you, Justin. As you can probably tell since it's a male's voice, I am Geoff, and Meaghan you'll be hearing from momentarily. The first thing I wanted to do, it's a little bit of a paid ad. I will apologize for that in advance, but it will give you some of the context of how we're covering the BI space. We have had people ask us why we still call it BI, given that was an older term, but we're thinking of it in terms of the idea that everything that you're trying to do with big data and analytics is to shorten the time to insight for businesses. So it truly is business intelligence. Having a large set of data or having great analytics algorithms without the data to run it against is not going to give you business intelligence. So when we think of it, we realize it's an older term, but the way we're using it is we're steadfast in the idea that what we really are trying to do is look at the ways in which customers can extract business value to improve their time to intelligence, to make actionable decisions around their business, generating more revenue or stripping more cost out of their business streams. Now, how we take a look at the market, the other proposition that we have is that the technology and the adoption of technology is not the biggest impediment right now in the market. It's the human adaptation to what technology can do and understanding what it will provide from a strategy perspective for the business users is one piece of this, but the other piece of this is dealing with IT and working with IT to re-educate them, provide them with the necessary skills to manage, maintain, orchestrate, and operate the new data fabrics that are available because of technology innovation. So as a result, we take a look at the software market and the professional services market because we are believing that this space is very much strategy-led, and therefore you have to look at the two together. So with that having been said, the products that we have, as you can see, we have the benchmarks. That's what we're talking about here. We have market forecasts, and we have customer research tracks and studies. And we do have a slide, because I oversee both, and I was reviewing the customer research. We've added a slide from that in this webinar to give you an idea of how these two tie together. So this is our portfolio with respect to BI as TBR defines it. And with that, we can jump to the next slide. And what you'll see here is an overview of the Business Intelligence Software Vendor Benchmark and what it provides you. On the left-hand side, you can see what the executive summary has, the segment views as to how we split it up, the regional views, and of course the appendices with all the pretty charts and graphs. On the right-hand side is the database and Excel pivot table we provide as a companion deliverable with the PowerPoint deck that constitutes the benchmark itself, which gives you the revenue by the product segments, regions, some headcount estimates, operational metrics, and profitability expenses. And the time period for these are, we do it every 6 months, and we've been delivering it since 1Q13.
And so with that, I'll jump in. This is Meaghan. Thank you, Geoff. So this slide details what is new in this quarter to the benchmark. So we replaced Actuate with OpenText because OpenText acquired Actuate, which was finalized in 1Q15. So throughout the benchmark, we have OpenText metrics from 1Q15 forward. We also added FICO this quarter, as an interesting player in the market. They're well known for their credit scores, obviously. That's the reputation they have. But they're much more than that. They are a true analytics company, so we wanted to add them in. One of the biggest things we did this quarter was we added this color coding that you see on the left-hand side of the table. So before this quarter, all of the vendors throughout the graphs were very just any color that really made them stand out. And so we've grouped them into 4 different buckets to give you a little more context around what the company's portfolio breadth is. So you'll see at the top we have the BI pure plays who are very much focused on BI as their core portfolio. We then have software vendors who have BI in addition to some other business applications, other software, database software, middleware, et cetera. We then have the multi-line and internet companies, so the companies that not only have software businesses, but many also have hardware businesses, and that really comes in when we talk about engineered systems in the benchmark. And then we have the Hadoop distribution vendors sort of separated out because they have a very different business model. They're very much they're leveraging the open source Hadoop platform and adding their value-add services on top of that. So they're a very different value proposition, so we have them separated out. Moving forward, we're always looking for the feedback of our customers on what you think should be added, what's valuable to you. So in the questions or in an email to us, any ideas you guys have for further improvement on this benchmark is greatly appreciated on our end.
If I can add there, we are looking at a variety of different firms to incorporate in here as the business does shift more into data management and what you do with it in order to derive those business decisions. Our lead analyst on the Internet of Things, John Spooner, and I have been talking, and he was giving me some background on some of the different initiatives that GE has been doing, and we believe once we can take a look at some of the financial data to make sure we have some accuracy in modeling, it's highly likely we'll be adding GE as somebody back into this benchmark. I find them very personally interesting based on my years in the industry. I did a lot of work for them back in the late 1980s when they were in the time-shared services business, which was enabled by containers for mainframes, and now here we are in this new world where containers are back to the fore, I should say, and here comes GE again with a technology offer that is a derivative of their core business practices, with entirely different business models and operating metrics to this entrance back into IT as opposed to what they did in the late 80s. And I find them a very fascinating company to take a look at as a bellwether example of the differences as well as the similarities in this transformation cycle compared to the one that was going on as minis were starting to come to the fore and mainframes were starting to disintegrate.
All right, and so with that, this is an overview of our taxonomy within the BI software market, as Geoff sort of overviewed why we use the term BI rather than just analytics. So I will just dive into, I'll start with BI tools are really the point products that only address a single or dual purpose. That includes reporting, queries, spreadsheets, data visualization tools that are really just focused on that one capability. Whereas the BI applications above that in the blue, those are really all-encompassing, or those are solutions that encompass multiple aspects of what would fall under BI tools. So it's integrated applications that have data mining, data visualization, reporting, and queries all integrated into one application. BI apps and platforms also includes the analytic components of other business applications as well as platforms. Then down in data management, that's a segment that we sort of revamped in the 4Q14 iteration of this benchmark. We really expanded that from just data warehousing to include databases, because we see, databases hold all the information that you're querying with these BI applications, and so we really saw those as central to the evolution of the BI market as a whole. So we've added in the database businesses of a lot of the legacy vendors such as Oracle, Microsoft, and some of the emerging guys like MarkLogic, et cetera. Then at the bottom of the list, we have BI and Analytics Engineered Systems, which take a portion of the software revenue from the above segments and integrate the hardware sales that are where units are sold as software and hardware boxed up, ready to go to be put into a customer's environment. So that's more of a delivery method than a singular software revenue bucket. And this slide just details what the subsegments of those are. So as I mentioned, reporting, queries, spreadsheets, all that fall under the BI tools, and then apps and platforms have analytic components of biz apps, et cetera. So I think we pretty well went over that, and we can move on to the content of the report. So this is an overview of our market forecast. As Geoff mentioned, in what we offer, we do have a market forecast report that we'll be putting out at the tail end of this year, I believe, for software. But here you can see, so the vertical bars are the covered vendors in this benchmark, and the line above them is our market forecast. So we believe that our vendors cover, in round numbers, about 80% of the market. And within this, we include many of the large legacy software vendors, so Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, HP, and that whole group of companies. So the gap between our covered vendors in the market is mostly small, relatively young BI emerging vendors, some of the small database vendors who are really disrupting the market right now. And we'll go into a bit more on what is really affecting the covered vendors. I just wanted to point out that you'll see here the covered vendors declined a little less than 1% in 2Q15, while the entire landscape grew a little more than 3%. And we'll go into the factors of what caused our group of 29 covered vendors to compress over that period. So this graph goes with the one that's on the next slide as well, but let me just first orient you to what these graphs are, because they're a little unique. So the horizontal axis on this graph is research and development expense as a percent of revenue, and the vertical axis is sales and marketing expense as a percent of revenue. The dotted lines that you see are actually the averages across all 29 firms for those metrics. So the 15% average R&D expense as a percentage of revenue is across the vendors you see here, the multi-lines, the software vendors, the software and hardware vendors, as well as the BI pure plays and Hadoop vendors that will be on the next slide. The thing to note on this graph is how short the lines are. So across the year, going from 2Q14 to 2Q15, we don't see these vendors really changing the magnitude of their investments very much. You see SAP, Microsoft, IBM, SAS, Informatica, all their lines are very short, meaning that they haven't made a lot of changes. They're very big, they're very stable companies. The one exception that stands out is MicroStrategy here, and their movement is due to a restructuring effort that had them cut about, I believe it's 800 people from their workforce. And you can see that sales and marketing declined, and R&D actually went up as a percentage of revenue, and that shows that they're really trying to focus on innovation and evolving their product to compete better in the market. Geoff, do you have anything to add to this slide before I go to the BI pure plays?
No, I think we'll get into it when we get to the next slide, because
okay.
That'll give the compare.
Perfect. So, all right. On this graph, you can see that the lines get a little bit longer. This is the BI pure plays and Hadoop distribution vendors. They are vendors that have a smaller end size, so when they grow revenue and not expenses, that even a little bit of revenue growth will show a greater change in expense per revenue. And so, I mean, the one outlier here is Pivotal, obviously, and that's really due to the scale of EMC, as Pivotal is a subsidiary of them, and Pivotal really benefits from the scale that EMC has.
Right. What I think this shows a little bit is when you look at the native cloud vendors that are coming to market. This is Pat Gelsinger in the VMworld keynote speech he gave, talked about 5 imperatives of what's going on in the industry. And his lead imperative was what he called the shift from symmetric to asymmetric competition. And he used the analogy there of warfare, to be honest, and talked about the 1700s in Britain and France going at each other around the globe. It was symmetric warfare versus the War of Independence with the U.S. colonies, which was asymmetric. And the idea that in the old days, big beat small. In the New World Order, fast beats slow. And for these small firms, it's this race for the scale, for gaining the mind share. It's everything that you hear when you listen to the public native cloud firms report their earnings, talking about how GAAP standards don't align to what they're doing, that you got to recognize the expense in this quarter, but the revenue gets recognized ratably because it's a subscription, so on and so forth. And this chart with everybody in the upper right, where they've got large, huge amounts of spend. On the income statement, the average is 40 points. These guys are all above the average, so they've got about 60 to 70% of their operating expenses. That's a big number, and generally most of them are losing money, and they're all saying they'll make it up on the renewals. So this movement, as this industry starts to stabilize, as this emerging area around BI, tool sets, the different incremental niche elements that people need to get the true solution that they want, these are the vendors where you're going to see a lot of new entrants and a lot of consolidations going on as this shakes out, as opposed to the database pieces, which was that other slide we showed, which had a lot of the stability of the SAPs and Microsofts and Oracles and IBMs of the world, who are largely tied in there with the database.
Yeah, and one thing to note on this graph in particular, as I mentioned, that gap in our market forecast, or the gap between our covered vendors and the market forecast, is a lot of emerging vendors. So those would also fall in this upper right quadrant of really innovating and increasing their sales expenses. So the two lines that really stand out on this graph are Tableau and Domo. They're the ones who are growing expenses as a percentage of revenue, whereas the other ones are, other companies are still seeing rapid growth, and their revenue growth is outpacing their expense growth. Tableau is a company that we actually will talk about a little later, but we think they're one of the vendors that are becoming a little more of a de facto standard, whereas everyone in the other segments, there's still a lot of vendors competing for that prominence, I guess you would say. But we believe Tableau is going to keep investing ahead of revenue growth for a while to really maintain the lead that we think they have on the market. Within this time frame, also Domo actually unveiled its business management platform that was, until I believe it was April, was very secretive, and they did that so that they could innovate ahead of competitors, and competitors wouldn't exactly know what they were chasing. We believe they'll have to continue to innovate to stay ahead now that competitors know what their platform offers customers and know what to target when selling against Domo. So with that, we'll move on to the key takeaways from this quarter's benchmark. So this is an overview of the 4 topics we'll be diving deeper into, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but we will be talking about, as I mentioned, what caused the covered vendors to decline in revenue year to year. We'll also talk about some of the standards that are starting to emerge in the BI market. We will talk about what customers are really looking for, especially in the database market, and then we'll talk about what customers are looking for in the BI applications area, and then what changes are coming in the data management space. So the first topic we dive into is really what's challenging those core 29 vendors that we cover. And I think the first thing that I would point out is the large legacy license bases of HP, IBM, Microsoft, Oracle, SAP, even SAS to an extent, that those legacy license bases are facing erosion from cloud deployments. Cloud deployments are lower revenue per initial contract. They are much lower margin for the most part. Geoff and I put out a thought leadership piece on sort of the, Oracle has given us a lot of metrics to really do some good projections around how the transition to cloud or cloud adoption will erode new software license revenue moving forward, and how those margins are really going to affect things. So we put out a thought leadership piece on that. You can find it on our website. I thought it was very interesting, but I might be a little biased there. So we're really seeing that shift to cloud impact a lot of those bigger vendors. So as a big portion of our covered vendor revenue base, as they see declines in their revenues, that's really going to impact what the top line does. We're also seeing, especially for SAP and other international vendors, TBR's conversion of euros to US dollars for comparison purposes is really hitting their revenue line negatively. And then we're also seeing a lot of sort of database shakeup, which we'll go into later in this presentation, but that is impacting the core database vendors, so Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, et cetera. And Geoff, did I miss anything, or?
No, the only thing I would say that the numbers, first off, Meaghan did a great job on that piece we wrote around, we used Oracle as an example. It was not to single them out to say they were doing anything wrong or that they had made any missteps, but the clarity they give to the financial impact that they're going through enables us to use them as a model for that. And so I'm going to use the term compression ratio, and by that what I mean is in the first year, how much is the revenue compressed if rather than sell the license that then would have ongoing maintenance in years 2, 3, and beyond, versus the first year subscription. And so $1 of license turns into 33 cents. That's the compression ratio. That's what the cloud vendors are talking about when they say, oh, we make it up in the renewal, but we got to have the full expense of that selling that used to be mapped against $1 of revenue, now it's mapped against the 33 cents. So that's the compression ratio. On the sales, what we found more through anecdotal evidence with qualitative interviews with leading SIs asking, well, what's it look like when you're doing a traditional rip and replace of the old on-prem SI work, when you're doing a transformation deal so that they can migrate from that on-premise up and over into a cloud platform. So say from a legacy CRM system to Salesforce. And that ratio is 6-to-1 rather than 3-to-1, with the difference that the 2x multiplier being services automation from repeatable frameworks and blueprints and tools that are inherent company IP that needs to be monetized in the engagements.
Yeah. All right. And so the next topic is focused on the idea that the BI market, for the most part, is very young and volatile. There's still a lot of emerging players, and very few sort of de facto standards have yet to emerge. The one exception we're really seeing to that is Tableau, and this comes from an evaluation of the partnerships that are happening in this space. So Tableau continues to show up as really the go-to partner. And for example, just looking at vendors that are in the other 28 in this benchmark, both FICO and IBM have partnered with Tableau to really embed Tableau in their solutions. So they fall under the OEM partner list. And then other competitors such as Burst and Splunk have ensured interoperability just because Tableau is really gaining traction in the market. And without interoperability, they are at threat to alienate themselves. So Tableau we have 40 plus here. It's much closer to 50, I believe, of connectors, so that Tableau really works with most databases that customers have already established, and so there's really no resistance to adoption there. We see Tableau sort of emerging almost as a challenger to Microsoft in the productivity space. They have a very strong visualization tool, and you're able to publish reports and presentations from it, and we really think that they're one to watch in this space.
Yes, this is one of my long view crazy ideas. Is if you think of the business productivity tool sets, the de facto standard was Microsoft Office for the business productivity that we were doing before we had digital-enabled services, systems of engagement that had different kind of outputs, as well as the fact that you can pretty much inject or bake in analytics queries to quicken time to intelligence again. That's the component of it. You've got to move this from being a niche application for data scientists and get it out into the hands of business users. Now, one of the things that we do, and at TBR, we are a business productivity user, building these decks, moving things around from Excel to PowerPoint, sometimes in Word and back again, is if they have very simple visualization tools that enable that kind of work productivity output in a way that is more user-friendly than the way that you can get it done in Office, then they have a good chance to take away some market share there from Office. Now, on the flip side, we know Microsoft is innovating around Office and baking in a lot of these things. They have Power BI as one of the pieces that they're putting in there. So quite clearly, Microsoft is not standing still. This isn't, again, fault Microsoft for what they're doing. But when you have a very dominant market share for business productivity, in theory, you've got very little room to move up and a lot of room to go down. And Tableau could be the one that has them lose a little bit of market share in that space.
Yeah, so this is really a trend we're starting to see emerge and something we're going to continue to track moving forward. Another thing that we noticed looking at sort of the partnership strategies of a lot of firms in our benchmark was that many of the BI pure plays and some of the software multi-lines, including MicroStrategy, Informatica, we found that they're part of the group of companies that are going, quote, all in on AWS. And what these companies really stand to gain through these partnerships is the ability to globally distribute their cloud solutions easily through the Amazon network. Amazon, as many of you probably know, is a leader in the public cloud infrastructure space. They have data centers across internationally. And they're opening their 12th region in India in 2016. And that's really going to help these vendors establish themselves in those regions that they'd otherwise have trouble reaching on their own. So they're really leveraging AWS's infrastructure investments for their own gains. And I think it's going to help them win some market share there.
Absolutely.
Aha. So this is Geoff's plugged slide from the BI software customer research, and it really substantiates what we were just talking about. But I'll let Geoff take the stage for this one.
Right. This came out of a content review I was doing yesterday at 5 p.m. for Andrew Smith, who I also asked to come in to discuss this with me. So I'm completely shifting gears with you, but this is a different piece of the research that we do around the BI space. And this is the customer research around adoption. Now, we have the three categories we use internally to discuss end customer buyers. What type of IT buyers are they? And I'll start from the bottom and move up. Are they, and we consider this the more traditionals, do they want to own and control? This would be like the old-fashioned on-prem guys. They want to buy it, they want to hook it up themselves, and they want to run it themselves. So it's own and control. For others, it's build the results. So they'll do some of it inside. They'll buy pre-built systems. They'll plug and play. They might need some integration work as well, and they'll pull it all together. But ultimately, there'll be something that they're going to be running for the most part themselves, rather than just throwing the car keys to somebody else to take care of for them. And then the sort of emerging buyer, the fancy term that we're hearing all the time, is the buyer buying the outcomes. They don't care about the underlying technology. They want to know what it will do for their business, either for cost takeout or for revenue growth. And these people are the ones that are buying the SaaS solutions and just running them and letting their lines of business deal with it, and IT doesn't have to be as involved as they would want to be. So what we have here, those percentage numbers are what the question we asked, and the answer for 2 years is in the blue call out on the right. But the question was, how do you view yourself? Are you an own and control, a build of results, or an outcome buyer? And where do you think you'll be in 2 years? So the arrows pointing down is what we see here is the build results right now is the biggest chunk of it. And that is going to shrink, with 7% saying they're going to evolve to an outcome buyer and 4% saying they're going to go back down to own and control. So my top of mind thinking in this yesterday at 5, and then I talked to Andrew to make sure I wasn't completely all wet, is it confirms a proof point we have that around BI, it's a consulting-led purchase decision today, but here are the two different reasons why it's consulting-led. The 7% jump is the consulting-led from the strategy side, as you would know at the advisory, on how to transform your business and reorganize your lines of business to better take advantage of what technology can do for you. So this is that move into the digital services economy, systems of engagement, all the different ways you have to interact, and it's the value prop that needs the ROI better spelled out rather than the TCO to show them why they need to, say, scrap the old investment or transform out of that old infrastructure that they have into a new one to get at the faster time to intelligence to inform business. That's migrating up. Now, the other piece of this, the other layer, so I tried to say strategy consulting, because now the other way is more, that's the IT transformation challenge. That is your internal IT shop that might have been reticent to get into the cloud because they were uncertain of how to do the management, the orchestration, all the infrastructure management elements. And we just had that webinar yesterday where there's a lot of disruption going on in that piece. So these are people who really potentially want to do it on their own, but their IT guys don't feel like they have the skills in order to get that done. So they're working with advisory consultants and people that have close-to-the-box consulting to show them how to integrate it, stitch it together, build out a seamless hybrid cloud, secure it, and make sure that it still informs the business. So that erosion that we see from this customer study to us is the reason why it's built there in the middle is right now it's a consulting-led purchase decision that's going to be going on for all of these different aspects, and why those small niche vendors really need to be courting the SIs to get the certification from the Accentures, the Deloittes, the SAPs, the Oracles, all these people. We bless that this works with our underlying fabric, and then the strategy-led people who have the account coverage and the professional services staff to educate and train the IT buyer on how to deploy Tableau or how to deploy a Hadoop cluster in order to get to the desired outcome. They've got to teach those IT guys on how to run the business. Andrew, do you have anything that you would like to add to this?
No, I would just reiterate that throughout the customer study, the point that there's a lot of teaching and hand-holding of customers that needs to be done to make this migration a reality. And you know, so you think about it from the build results perspective, as that bubble shrinks and those customers move to the outcome or the own and control segment. I mean, look at the major ownership of risk for build results buyers. They want a shared risk program, and security is at the top of every customer concern list that we got back on the survey. So, you know, the march to the cloud is inevitable. Security is becoming more robust. Customers are understanding their security concerns better and where their data resides and how they need to get to it. So, you know, there's kind of, I think that explains some of the exodus of this build results group. But the opportunity is, the short-term opportunity for vendors is to now take ownership of that and deliver results, higher value results as customers move throughout buyer groups.
Great. Back to you.
All right. I love listening to them go on about the customer study stuff. It's very interesting to me. And so this next topic is sort of more of a forward-looking, less of a what have we seen and more of a what will we see. So as BI software solutions are increasingly impacting line of business and vertical software portfolios, especially as industries become more and more data-driven. So we believe that the traditional vendors with the deep pockets and really established expertise and well-known brand are really going to be able to capitalize on that and develop the comprehensive vertical-specific solutions, especially in areas that are more highly regulated, such as healthcare and financial services, government, et cetera, two companies that are very established, especially in the financial services segment, are FICO and SAS. All of you probably know FICO as the credit score company, but and that is what they're known for. That is what their brand basically stands for, but it's much more than that. They're working to really message what's behind the scores, and that's their analytics offerings. They are an analytics company. So they are very well established in the banking industry, and they have the experience with the fraud, risk, and compliance, meeting those regulations. I mean, there's always, in the financial services segment, there's the questions of sort of why did you decide to give someone a loan and not someone else? And there's so many moving parts that financial institutions have to document and securely back up everything, and it's a segment that's always changing. So we think there's always going to be opportunity there. We think FICO and SAS will evolve their portfolios to leverage their proven expertise in fraud, risk, and compliance and move that into the government sector and healthcare. Moving into healthcare, they are going to face IBM, who has been investing in Watson, which is sort of core to where they're going in the analytics space. And one part of that, just one little part, is IBM's Watson Health Unit, which I know Geoff is just itching to chime in here on that, so I'll let him fill you guys in on what IBM's doing there.
This is a standard rollout by vertical industry that IBM has been doing for years, and the way my mentor taught it to me, it's tough to use. It was a Jack Benny joke, and a lot of folks who are probably listening don't know who Jack Benny was, but he was a vaudeville comedian who was known to be cheap. And he was held up supposedly on a radio snippet by somebody saying, you know, give me your money or your life. And he delayed, and the guy says, you know, what are you waiting on? And he goes, I'm thinking, because he was cheap. But the two most important things we have are our money and our lives. So the standard industry way you did it, you don't have to go to government anymore because you don't need to buy the assets to get there. But innovation starts with healthcare and financial services. And when Watson came out, the first use case I saw, and it was demonstrated to me in December of 2011, was around health, specifically around a diagnosis of rickets that had taken previously had taken a standard medical practitioner months to diagnose by going and, ripping down out of the library copies of things and photocopying it and running through it. And this man was an advisor to IBM on their healthcare corpus, the first one they built. And he plugged in that same set, and within, I can't remember, a matter of minutes, out of the 10 potential diagnoses that was there, the one that he had taken months to find, and this woman had been in pain for like 6 to 8 months, came up as the fourth most logical thing to diagnose. So it's this idea of extending out through scale. Now, the core enabler, of course, is cognitive. But what they had to do was build out the niche-specific assets to make it as vertically relevant as possible. So the Watson Health Unit, while they announced it, it was stitching together a lot of the existing assets they had inside their company, plus some pieces they bought, one of which is what I use the term a community cloud. It was specifically for health. They're able to infuse the Watson engine into that and scale it out to many markets. So this is a classic example of how they will verticalize this core enabling technology, cognitive computing, to drive time to insight or reduce time to insight for niche-specific industry areas. Now, what they just announced yesterday was the creation of the cognitive, it's not a unit.
Cognitive Intelligence Department?
It's department or solution, but it's basically now a set of 2,000 consultants that know how to translate Watson Cognitive into vertically oriented industry outcomes. So it's the whole concept of, as you do the high value services and engagements that are in that time and materials solution mode, you build internal frameworks, internal IP that you can now scale and therefore do the similar engagement for far less money and far less time to quicken the time to intelligence for the outcome-based buyer in the vertical industry segment. So what you see IBM doing in these types of pieces, expect to see it going on over and over again. It's the ways in which FICO has relevance in the analytics area. It's the way that GE will be able to come back into the technology industry with a lot of relevance around the Internet of Things through the Predix organization that they have that we're very high on internally here at TBR.
All right.
Now this chart, this is a tough chart for me at least, because what has happened in the year that I've been in this group doing this, I've changed my mind on what's going to happen with databases, and I'm an old man who doesn't like to change his mind very often, but I have to here. I was running under that old knowledge I had that databases were very sticky, and if there was a place where vendor lock-in could still remain, it would remain on the database layer. I don't believe that anymore. What I believe is the maintenance, or the way that you're going to maintain your relevance in databases is the ability for your database to seamlessly import and export data sets in and out of your database structure into others. So it's data management. What you see, again, I'll reference IBM, it was their Compose acquisition that kind of solidified this in my head, where with the Compose acquisition they picked up, I believe it was 5 different database structures that they could now ingest into the Watson Analytics engine. I think it's the DataWorks platform. I may have the wrong product name on that. I apologize for not having it off the top of my head. But what you're going to see is more this seamless transportability in and out of these different data sets. And that's good news for the Hadoop distributions. It's good news there. It's less of a threat for the traditional systems of record guys, the Oracles, the SAPs, and Microsoft SQL Server, because systems of record are not really the things that are changing. So it will be a far slower migration out or off those. They're never going to go away, just like mainframes have never gone away. But what we're seeing and why it drags down the numbers that we have in this space is because these are the ones that are having the shift from license to subscription. There will be that slow roll as people decide they need to pick up, say for Oracle, multi-tenancy or in-memory, and rather than move from 11G to 12C on-prem, they may go to the Oracle Cloud Platform instead. SAP is trying to do the same thing with HANA Enterprise Cloud. So we know there are all these movements. IBM software really talks about DB2 in and of itself. I was confused as to why they were doing that. I think the reason they were doing that is because of this shift in my own thinking that databases aren't going to be the lock-in. You're going to have to interconnect among them. So there's plenty of opportunity in the systems of record. It's 80% of the data captured gets deployed because you've got to inform your SEC filings. You've got to know what your inventory control is, your HR records, your payroll records, on and on down the line. The need to have that data and use that data will never go away. That's kind of our traditional modes of business. But the new mode of business, the digital business, you're using about 5% of it. So you're not going to want an expensive data warehouse license of one of these legacy analytics shops to keep it on there. So a lot of like Indian pure play vendor opportunities are going to people with these traditional legacy installs, showing them a way to extract that data out of this data warehouse, put it into a cheaper Hadoop data lake to store it, say call it cold storage or however you want to define that, less strategic information. You can retire a couple of those expensive database licenses, but still have the one you need when you want to extract it out of the lake, ingest it back in, run the query, get the results, and then get it back out of there and store it cheaply again. So you're seeing a lot of opportunity accelerating the demise of some of these niche-specific players, and you're seeing the opportunity just in the explosive growth of how much data we have sitting around in systems of engagement that you don't necessarily want to throw out, but you're not sure when or if you're going to need it, so you want a cheaper way to store it. Hopefully that made sense.
All right. And with that, we're on to the questions part, so I'll turn it back over to Justin to moderate.
All right. So just a reminder, please send any questions you have to the Q&A session. And with that, let's get started with what we have in so far. All right. So what are some of the vendors you're considering adding to the benchmark in the future?
Well,
Geoff discussed GE at the front end of this presentation. But I do know that, Andrew can chime in here, I know that Cisco's been popping up a lot more in the customer research recently. So we're looking into them, and Andrew can sort of position them a little better for you.
Cisco was all over the list of vendors utilized by customers in this half of the year study. So, we've dug in a little bit more into Cisco and into their big data solutions. Now we're kind of understanding better their strategy of utilizing all the data on the network, storing that, transporting it, managing it, and then they also have data visualization and some analytic capabilities as well. So they're popping up more with customers. Definitely a vendor we're going to consider adding to the benchmark as well.
Yeah, and in addition, or Geoff, did you want to chime in about Cisco?
Nope.
Okay, well, in addition to that, there's also the cloud vendors that TBR covers on a syndicated basis who are adding analytics into their portfolios, and we think will probably have to be considered in this benchmark moving forward. Among those, there's Workday has an analytics platform. The name is escaping me right now. Salesforce also announced Wave little less than a year ago, I believe, and as that gains more traction, we think we'll probably have to add it in. And just yesterday, AWS announced Amazon QuickSight, which is their visualization and analytics tool. Since they store all your data, they say, well, we might as well let you run analytics against it. So while that's a really new product that will most likely not go into the next iteration of this benchmark, but moving forward, we're always evaluating what players are going to have an increasing impact on the market and who's the most important to really cover in our benchmark. Since we can't cover the whole market, we really look for those that we think are going to drive change or have a dominant share.
Yes, all I was going to add is if you are a subscriber to this report, we welcome and encourage you to mention to us those vendors you believe we should be covering. No guarantees we'll get it done, but we do like to do that. The challenge we have is we prefer to have public firms to do that so that we can get into the economic modeling and the income statement investigations as to what's going on and what's the profitability, where are the profit pools, how are they monetizing value, what are the threats to that, is it a revenue problem that the firm's experiencing because they're a legacy. I mean, when I think of this space and I think of the traditional analytics vendors, I go back to remembering the niche capability that Tandem had for font tolerance back in the hardware big iron days of the late 1980s. It was very niche. It was needed saving. Again, it was healthcare and it was financial services. You couldn't have these things fault tolerance. Was not something where we had the consumerized price points to be able to drive it out into a broad-based sort of horizontal hardware capability. Well, analytics was one of those niche things. You had the data scientist in IT, you asked them how to do it, and you got it done. We've got to get it consumerized. We've got to get it into the hands of the business users. And will those models be able to scale down and break up into a different kind of value proposition that's more consumerized, lower price points, in order to remain relevant, or will they go the way of Tandem? And, I don't know the answer to that, but that's the way, as I'm coming to this, how I'm trying to apply the history I know, although wise men learn from history, fools repeat it. I'm trying to take these historic lessons, know what makes sense to apply to what I'm seeing, and know what I got to throw out is it just doesn't apply anymore because of virtualization and on down the line.
All right, looks like we only have one other question that's come in so far. So when do you expect financial and macroeconomic conditions in Europe to improve?
Oh boy, that's a great question. It ties to actually work I did in college at the London School of Economics, taking a look at the European economic community. And the honest answer I have is I'm not sure when it's going to improve. So if we set aside government, and that's a hard thing to set aside over in Europe right now, but if you set that aside, what I think we can say, at least within BI and all these other things, is this is really in that innovation incubation stage. It's probably crossed the chasm from early adopter into early majority or somewhere on that, the big part of the sine curve spike. And when that happens, typically innovation is going to be kept close to home. Now, for most large enterprise, home is U.S.-based, so it's going to be kept close to home. We expect to still see strong growth in Americas. Then once it's been, baked, remember the talk of repeatable frameworks and blueprints. The way IBM talks about it from what you can do in Bluemix and SoftLayer is once you've stood it up and you've got the departmental instance set, you can mirror a copy of the departmental instance overnight, around the globe in the, what do they have, 49 data centers? They got a lot of data centers. So that they can flip that over overnight. Now that's a much faster transformation than when you had to do, okay, we've got this solved, we got to ship a mini out here, we've got to ship this out, we got to wire it up, we got to fly somebody out to program it, and then, on down the line. It used to take you 6 months to turn on a departmental instance. Now you can do it overnight, provided you can get them trained. So when we look at the EMEA space, from that vantage point, we would expect as early majority hits to see EMEA start to uptick. That having been said, we know data sovereignty is freezing a lot of the activity over there to understand how the data needs to be treated. There are going to be concerns around the sovereign debt issues and how is the European community going to allow these independent nation states manage their macroeconomic policy when in fact the common currency takes away one of the two most important levers you have, is what are you going to do around setting your currency against others, and if you have to have a standard currency against these competing nation states and their economic policies, you got a lot of challenges to hit. Now the EU's been around since about 1960. It could be, again, they try to regulate economic activity, and we're in the middle of a massive shift in what is the economic engine. You can take a look, it can be argued that the 1929 meltdown that we had was sort of the chickens all coming home to roost as we shift from an agrarian mentality or an agrarian economy to a manufacturing economy. All of our SEC reporting requirements were to make sure there was no moral hazard in the way that we were tracking manufacturing-based economic activity. That isn't what we do anymore. It's services activity. It's knowledge work. So we're in the middle of that paradigm shift, and as a result, the way government regulates and monitors economic business activity is going to have to change as well. And it's unclear how quickly and cogently 30 different nation states in the European Union are going to be able to get that done.
All right. Looks like we have one final question that came in here. In your opinion, who are the future acquisition targets and IPO possibilities?
Well, I'll take a swing at this. I mean, from pure speculation, or well, I guess two come to mind that I believe will IPO at most within the next year. Burst is one of those that has been relatively public about raising money through investors in order to go public. Domo is another one that comes to mind as someone who has, I believe they hired a CFO, I can't remember when, but somewhat recently, who took, I believe it was SuccessFactors through their IPO before acquisition. And he's really seen as an expert in getting companies ready for their IPOs, Bruce Felt. And so I really think that within the next year, Domo and Burst are the two, at least that we cover, that are going to be going public. From an acquisition target perspective, maybe Good Data, DataStax, maybe one of those that have not a small portfolio, but a smaller portfolio that would still be easier to integrate into a bigger company's breadth of solutions. Beyond that, I don't know. Jeff, do you have any other ideas?
The issue becomes, again, to get into sort of some theory, for years, in order to prove you were smart, to prove you were the smartest guy in the room, you had to invoke Porter's 5 forces. There's now a belief that is perhaps an antiquated way to look at how to manage business, and what you have to do is take a look at complementary assets. And the stitching together of complementary assets, if it's not something you're good at, get rid of it. which frankly is one of the issues about enterprise IT, and will you keep that captive enterprise IT, or are you going to just buy results and get out of creating the IT business? The analogy I use about that piece is, as the manufacturing economy was springing up, you had to build your own power plants. You had to have a water wheel to generate electricity. You had to be somewhere where you could quickly generate your own electricity. Then we wired it all up and you just bought it from the electric utility company. So if compute goes that way, will they shed that complementary asset? So when you look at some of these things, are there some very good quality niche firms that have been somewhat of a lifestyle business for the key leaders of that business, sort of very tightly controlled or private, and if they were acquired by somebody because the leaders want to cash out, could that core technology be brought in, ingested, and scaled? I mean, IBM is doing this all over the place with very small tuck-in acquisitions, but if somebody's trying to make a big splash and get into analytics because they feel they're behind the curve or the technology they have isn't there, could some of the traditional quieter firms be bought because there's the marketing and distribution scale to drive that out at a faster rate? Because if it's software, it's easy to repeat, the IP is easy to scale out. That's kind of a vague way of going after that, but that's one of the ways I think you'll see that too. You know there's going to be consolidation. It's just a question of who's going to pick up what when.
Cool. All right. Well, that's all we have time for and all the questions we have. So I'd like to thank Geoff and Meaghan for your time today. Thank you, everyone, for attending and for sending in questions.
If I could make a final plug, the last thing we have is we asked you to rate the survey and we asked for some comments. We encourage you to provide us with some feedback, to tell us what else you think you would like to see in these things, particularly if you're a paid subscriber. Meaghan does a lot of work on this. She is a brilliant analyst. She's the one who broke that piece on Oracle that helped us take a look at some margin models. And I'd love to be able to buy more of her TBR time to work on this report. And the only way I can get that done is if I have more interest from you folks. So if you could tell us what we can do to make this more actionable and valuable to you, we would love to get into a dialogue with you on what it is we might be able to do in this report. But thank you for your time.